Okay, well, thank you guys for joining us today. Really appreciate the overwhelming response that we got. I'm really excited to have so many people joining us for this webinar today. My name is Dr. Becky Bowling. Here in a second, I'll go around and introduce my colleagues who are joining us today for a special backyard edition of a weekly webinar that we offer as Extension Specialist agents called Chat with Green Aggies. So several of us that are a part of that. And we decided to put this together today to answer several from the public on the topic of this winter storm recovery, the potential impact that it may have on your plant material, how you can assess the injury and damage that you may have experienced, and steps that you can take going forward to try to help those areas of your landscape recover. So we'll go around real quick and do a quick round of introductions, starting with Irfan.
Hi, my name is Irfan. I'm through the Department of Entomology.
Kevin?
Hey, I'm Kevin Ong, a plant pathologist, plant disease guy, here based in College Station.
Mung Mung?
Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Meng Gu, Professor Extension Specialist in Department of Horticulture Sciences in College Station.
Chrissy?
Hello, I am Chrissy Siggers. I am the Turfgrass Extension Specialist located at the Dallas Center.
Laura?
I'm Laura Miller, County Extension Agent in Tarrant County. Normally we have my colleague Paul Winsky with us, but he's not here today. So.
He's here.
He's here.
Here, all right.
He is here, yes.
I'm sorry, I didn't see Paul. Oh no.
Paul, you're up next.
Okay.
Somebody got to unmute him.
Oh.
Sorry, I need to make him a co-host here.
Okay, so Paul is here.
That's great.
And Paul is in Harris County. So
Paul, you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Okay, well, maybe we can go ahead and let Brent, would you like to introduce yourself real quick?
Sure. Glad to be here. I'm with the Texas A&M Research and Extension Center at Overton and also the Department of Horticulture.
Okay. Paul, are you able to join us now? Not sure what's going on there. Anybody else that we need to introduce before we move forward? We're good. Okay, great. And like I said, I'm Dr. Becky Bowling. I'm an Extension Urban Water Specialist up here at Dallas with Chrissy. So we're going to start off today addressing some of the primary questions that we got about turfgrass systems. So Chrissy and I put some slides together. We're going to tag team this section for you guys, hopefully answer some of the more pressing questions that you have as it relates to turfgrass injury, damage, recovery, and then we'll hand it over to some of our colleagues here to let them talk about other parts of the landscape. So one of the first biggest questions that we got is how much injury should I expect? And we got this question in many different forms. We had some questions about specific cultivars, specific species. We had questions about how it may impact sod availability and turfgrass production in the state of Texas. And unfortunately, at this point, this is a question that's still very hard for us to answer. There's a lot of different factors that go into answering this question. So just a few of those that I'll kind of start introducing here. When it comes to factors that can affect cold susceptibility in turfgrass, you have everything from different species. We're going to see different degrees of susceptibility, different cultivars. We're going to see different degrees of susceptibility. The age and maturity of your turfgrass stand is going to play a role. A lot of times we may see that older, more established turfgrass areas may be able to respond to these types of significant weather events a little bit better than younger stands that may still have relatively immature root systems. Another thing that Christy and I have seen quite a bit was there's a lot of diversity, or was a lot of diversity going into this storm as to how active and green different turfgrass areas, different turfgrass lawns were. Even here in the Dallas area where we both are in our own neighborhoods, we might walk around and see that one St. Augustine lawn was dormant while another still looked pretty green. And so, if a turfgrass area was still pretty green, active, photosynthetically active, it may experience more injury than an area that was more dormant. The turfgrass system health, the health of your lawn going into winter this year is going to play a factor. How healthy and robust that root system was going into the winter season, how deep and vigorous your root development and rhizome development is with those species that produce rhizomes or below ground stems. The characteristics of your soil can make a difference. You know, Chrissy's going to talk about here in a minute the role of soil temperature, soil moisture a little bit in driving some of what we see. And certainly we see some variability in response of our turfgrass lawns just based on, is your soil sandier or more clayey? Did it have a lot of moisture in it at the time that the storm hit? There's a kind of an unknown when it comes to how much insulation we got from snow during the storm and how much that might have actually protected our turfgrass areas and kept our soil temperatures from dropping too much. And then Chrissy's also going to talk a little bit about different things that we may see as it relates to the direction or sloped areas in your landscape, the directions in which they face. So I'm going to hand it over to her, let her talk about a couple of these things in more detail.
Sure. So thanks, Becky. Like Becky mentioned, there's a lot of factors going here, right? Depending on where you're located in the state and what your specific site conditions were at the time of this winter storm. So this here is just an example from the Dallas area where we kind of mapped out some soil moisture. You can see that with the gray bars. You can also see with the blue line, that's our soil temperature minimum that we reached at approximately 3 inches. And you can see the difference of the soil temperatures versus the ambient temperatures, which are going to be represented by the thicker green and yellow bars. And so, you know, like we were saying, soil temperature is going to play a lot larger role in our particular risk of winter damage. And so those temperatures at the soil surface where those stolons or maybe those shoots are going to be located, and then further down into that 2 to 4 inch soil depth where our rhizomes and our crowns are located, that's going to be where we are going to expect damage to occur based on the temperatures. And so, of course, ambient temperatures are important, but soil temperatures are going to be where we focus on the most damage. And so, as Becky said, we did have a lot of snow coverage. And so if you want to go ahead and go to the next slide, Becky, we had a lot of snow coverage. So that's going to start helping us when we start talking about what temperatures did our soils actually get to. And so based on the species that we have, you know, Bermuda grass versus zoysia grass versus St. Augustine, we can kind of start speculating, well, do we expect to see some damage in those grasses? Now, there are areas where we can expect to see more damage than others. So if you find yourself with a, you know, north-facing slope in your site, you might start experiencing more winter kill. So, you know, that's due to less incoming sunlight. We see our soil temperatures heat up a little slower in those areas. And so we might experience some winter kill in north-facing slopes. Go ahead. Areas that you might have that have more traffic, you know, this is an example of a golf course, but it's still relevant to our yards. Areas that we might have been more shady or soil was compacted by vehicle or foot traffic, that's going to predispose those areas to the potential for more winter kill. And so those are kind of some things you can start thinking about. Well, did I have any areas that, you know, might not have had any soil moisture in it, or might have been more compacted, or might not have got as much sun? Those are kind of some of the areas where we can start kind of scouting for some winter kill. And I think our next slide shows us how to some things we can do right now. So, you know, think to yourself here, what kind of areas do you have? Do you suspect that you might have some winter injury? You can go out right now and take some turfgrass plugs. So collect them with a shovel, just a small little plug, and you can place those plugs into some containers and put them in a sunny place. So, you know, maybe a southern facing window, maybe a greenhouse if you have access to that. Keep those plugs watered adequately and start noticing in about 7 to 10 days if you start seeing any green growth start coming back from those plugs. And, 2 to 3 weeks, keeping those adequately watered, you should be able to tell if those plugs from that area are going to have some recovery potential. And, depending on how many areas you have, depending on how many you want to assess, of course, you can do multiple samples. And so those are just some things we can do right now where we are still kind of in that waiting period. We really don't know what's going to happen, but we can assess injury just by going out and looking at some of our plants.
So one of the other questions that we're getting quite a bit, this is normally the time of year that we may often be thinking about making a pre-emergence herbicide application on our lawns to protect ourselves from summer annual weeds. So I did want to review these terms very quickly for this audience, just to make sure that we're all on the same page with what these terms mean. So a pre-emergence herbicide we can think of as essentially a weed barrier. This is a herbicide that's designed to interfere with seedling emergence of weeds, primarily annual weeds, which will include things like crabgrass or goosegrass or spurge or things like that. And so we put this product out at certain points of the year. A lot of times on a home lawn, we're focused on a spring and a fall application to try to provide a barrier for our turf grass lawn to protect ourselves from those weeds that come up in those seasons. Post-emergence herbicides, which we'll also talk about in this section, are going to refer to those products that we use once a weed has come up and it's become visible and we're trying to control it once it's there in the landscape. So one of the big questions that we've gotten this year is, should I go ahead and apply my pre-emergence herbicide the way that I normally do? So here's a couple of things for you to kind of have in the back of your mind when you're thinking about this question. The first thing is that pre-emergence herbicides are intended for use on healthy, well-established turf grass systems, okay? So in general, anytime we've undergone any significant stress, whether it's from a weather event like what we've just experienced, or some kind of pest infestation or disease or anything like that, those are times where we want to probably hold back a little bit on these pre-emergence applications to encourage recovery and growth of our turf grass system and allow it to really thrive in those situations. So the other thing to kind of know here is that while some of our professionals may have access to a wider spectrum of pre-emergence herbicide products, many of the products that are available to the average Joe, at the big box stores, products that are going to be labeled with things like crabgrass preventer or weed preventer, many of these products contain herbicides that the way that they work is to essentially inhibit root growth and root development. Okay. And so when we're talking about weeds, this is great because as soon as that weed starts to germinate from its little seed, the herbicide can act very quickly to keep that weed from forming roots and coming above the ground. But it also means that it can have implications for our turf grass systems, inhibiting the turf's ability to produce roots at the beginning of the year. Now, on a normal year with a healthy turf grass system, a lot of times this effect may be minimal or very temporary. The turf grass is able to grow out of it, provided we follow label recommendations. However, when we've experienced a significant, again, kind of stress event like we had this year, this may create more of a challenge for our turf to recover from that. So the bottom line is, if you're really looking to be conservative and you have concerns about the health of your turf grass lawn, you might want to consider refraining from any pre-emergence herbicide applications in areas where you're suspecting turf grass injury has occurred. Wait until you see clear indications of green up and recovery in your turf grass, and then maybe apply a pre-emergence herbicide with a post-emergence herbicide a little later in the season once the turf grass has really started to green back up and fill in. Now, this sometimes prompts another question, well, am I still going to get anything out of that pre-emergence herbicide then if I'm applying it a little bit later in the season? So this is just a little bit of background on why we have the timing recommendations that we tend to have for pre-emergence herbicides. In the case of turfgrass home lawns, often that timing is reflective of 3 main weeds that we're trying to control. A lot of times 2 really is what it comes down to. We're focused on crabgrass emergence timing for spring and Poa annua or annual bluegrass emergence timing in the fall. And, similar to what Chrissy was talking about earlier with our turf grass and the importance of soil temperature, the same is true here. We tend to base our timing recommendations around the soil temperatures where we expect these weeds to germinate and emerge. So there is the possibility that if we apply our spring pre-emergence a little later this year, that some of these earlier, germinating weeds that germinate at cooler temperatures are still going to break through. So that's one thing we want to manage our expectations this year and recognize that we may have some weed challenges this year that we might not normally have if we use a pre-emergence in our program. But if may be worth it for the sake of protecting and preserving the integrity of our turf. And the other thing is that we have many other weeds that we may see in the landscape that germinate at those warmer temperatures. And so even if we apply that pre-emergence herbicide a little bit later, once we see clear indications that our turf is recovered and is looking healthy, we may still get some really great benefits from that and stop the emergence of some of the other weeds that we see showing up later in the season. A couple of examples of those might be things like spurge, or I had a question that we got about sandbur. Sandbur is one that we tend to see hit peak germination at fairly warm soil temperature. So certainly we can still get some benefit from applying that barrier a little bit later in the season. But if we do want to manage our expectations a little bit about some of the breakthrough that we may get early in the year. Another thing to kind of keep in the back of your mind with pre-emergence herbicides is there is a possibility that you're going to need to replant some areas of your turfgrass lawn this year if you see significant losses from winter injury. Just keep in the back of your mind that these products are going to potentially interfere with the establishment of new turfgrass areas. So, if you postpone your pre-emergence application and you're also looking at replanting, just be mindful that you're going to need to follow label recommendations to make sure that you apply that product at a time where it is not going to interfere with the establishment of any new seed, sod, sprigs, or plugs that you plant in your lawn. So last little bit of weeds here before we move on to fertilization. Should I apply a post-emergence herbicide in my yard like I normally do to help control weeds? So, certainly once we see that the turfgrass is actively trying to green back up, we want to be really judicious about the chemical applications that we make in that lawn. We really want to be mindful of the fact that herbicides, again, most of the time are going to be intended for use on healthy, well-established turfgrass systems. For this year, while we're trying to encourage recovery, we want to focus on integrated weed management. This means falling back on tactics like pulling weeds by hand, as well as having strong cultural control practices to encourage healthy, dense turfgrass recovery. If you do feel like you absolutely need to use a chemical herbicide to help control weed issues, we suggest that you stick with limited spot treatment this year instead of a broadcast application across the entire lawn, so that you can kind of localize where you're putting those herbicides out while your turfgrass recovers. So we got a lot of questions about fertilizer. Chrissy, I'll let you address some of these questions.
Sure. So some of the common questions that we got were, when should I fertilize this spring? So usually we want to recommend for homeowners to wait, and everybody to wait, until the turf grass is actively growing. Once you start seeing those green shoots, once the temperatures start warming up, you can start thinking about fertilizing. A lot of times, a good recommendation would be to wait until you have mowed your grass twice. And that can help you ensure that you do have an actively growing stand of turf grass. We always recommend for you to conduct a soil test if you have not in the last year. This will help you customize your program, ensure that you're using nutrients that your soil actually needs and can actually be taken up by the plant. And if you would like to use our soil water testing lab at A&M, you can visit soiltesting.tamu.edu. So we often also get the question, now that we've got a winter that was pretty severe, we're starting to think about these things, right? Should I fertilize before my next freeze to winterize my turf? So in general, nitrogen fertilizer should not be applied just prior to that anticipated freeze, because we don't want the stimulation of shoot growth. This is going to increase the likelihood of winter injury. So we want to avoid late nitrogen applications or applications when your grass is dormant. So soil testing, again, can help you prepare some applications in the fall to correct any imbalances that you might have already in the soil and to bring up your nutrients in your soil. But if the soil test does not call for putting down fertilizer, then I would avoid it going into winter.
So a couple of other things to just have in the back of your mind when you're thinking about lawn recovery. The first is just to remember that this is going to be a big shock to a lot of our turfgrass lawns. So we want to avoid any other stress as much as possible. And this goes for, as we do start to green up and have more activity, being really mindful that we're doing our due diligence to mow in the right ways, to irrigate in the right ways, to take a very balanced approach. Remember that mowing in itself is a stress on the turfgrass system. If we mow too short or too infrequently, this is going to scalp your turfgrass, and this is going to continue to kind of affect its ability to successfully recover and produce those deep roots we want it to produce. And so just being really cautious about that as you're going into the growing season. Also keeping in the back of your mind that there is a possibility for irrigation system damage. And so if you suspect or you're seeing any indications at all that some part of your irrigation system may be compromised, we suggest that you may work with a licensed irrigator to have somebody come in and audit that irrigation system for you, identify those repairs that need to be made before we get into the growing season and you're really dependent on that irrigation system to get you through the season. In particular, some of our irrigation specialists have really encouraged that you pay attention to your backflow preventer to ensure that there's no significant damage there. And then as you do start to use your irrigation system more here in a couple of months, just make sure that you monitor that system very carefully. This is always good practice to ensure that we don't see breaks or leaks that end up wasting water resources. We also did get some questions about what if I need to replant. We are going to offer a webinar on site preparation for planting later in the month, and I'll give you guys the details on that. So we won't get into that in too much detail today. But if you do end up thinking about replanting an area, you can try to think of this as an opportunity, albeit maybe not one that you were really looking for this year. But it can be a good time to think about whether or not it's a good, there's a different turf grass that you may want to change to. We have a lot of new cultivars that are available with new features in terms of how they perform in drought and cold conditions. And so that could be one thing to think about. And, when you are in that process of replacing turf and the soil's exposed, that's also a good time to think about whether or not you need to redesign your irrigation system in any way or do any significant repairs there, or whether or not you need to take any steps to address soil compaction or limitations in the soil so that you can have a better site for supporting turfgrass growth going forward. The other thing to kind of think about is if you do see that, parts of your lawn recover much better than others, you do have the option of pulling healthy plugs from those areas and planting them in the areas that did not fare as well, and kind of using that as a more budget friendly way to try to recover those areas. It will take more time than doing wall-to-wall sod, but just kind of depends on which area, how much injury you're seeing, how much healthy turf you have, as to whether or not this seems like it might be a good option for you. So we will be offering a program on site preparation for turfgrass planting on Thursday, March 11th at 12 p.m. And this is a program that's going to be live streamed through several of the Agrolife Facebook pages, including the Texas Plant Disease Diagnostic Lab and the Aggie Turf Facebook page. There may be some others in there as well. So if you don't follow those pages, that might be a good place to start to continue to get more information about this topic as we go forward. So I don't want to take up too much time. I took up more time than I meant to already. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it on over to my friends in horticulture and let them take it from here.
Okay, I'm going to share a screen. And then Mung, Brent, and Paul and I will all just talk. Okay, so one of of the questions we got, and I'm really glad Dr. Brent Pemberton is here since he's the main man in the Texas Superstars program. But one of the questions we got was, how about the cold survival of Texas Superstars? And what I wanted to say was, wow, it's all over the place. And Brent even said, well, some of them are annuals, so they're going to die every year anyway. So we've got everything from zone 11, which is, Brownsville, to zone 4. And then if you look at the Texas Superstars, there's a whole category called perennials, and you sometimes hear these called temperennials. So they're basically tropical plants that we can use as annuals, but you should expect that those will be gone if they were still living in your landscape. So Brett, you want to talk a little bit more about the Texas Superstars?
Well, I guess just to expand on that point, Laura, I see you've got a picture there of the knockout rose that was bred in Wisconsin. It's hardy to zone 4 or 5 or something like that. We've got hardy hibiscus in the perennials, which is hardy to zone 4. And then we've got, annuals, of course, which we're not going to be hardy in the tropical perennials that we call perennials. And you can't believe how many emails with questions about what is a perennial, because people Google it and they can't find anything about it. But anyway, basically tropical perennials that we use as annuals. And then there's a lot of them that are hardy in the southern part of the state normally, and not hardy in the northern part of the state. And so there's going to be a lot of those. So that line obviously shifted much further south during this storm. The citrus, even in containers protected, I have a small greenhouse at home that I try to heat, and I think it probably got down into the mid 20s in there, even with the heat on. And so my citrus look really, really rough. The stems still look okay. The leaves are brown, but so I'm hoping that they break out, from down below, which is typical of what you'd see if you have a really hard freeze down in the Rio Grande Valley, for example, which they did. And so, you're going to see that kind of damage on citrus that far south in the state. So anyway, yes, it is all over the place.
It is all over the place. Yeah. And that's my citrus in my kitchen, which only got down into the low 50s. So I think it's fine.
Hey, Brent, are you the one who coined the perennials and temperennials?
No, the perennial term was kind of predated me. I strongly suspect that has the stamp of Jerry Parsons.
Okay.
So this is a Texas thing.
Yes. Oh, yeah. It's a Texas Superstar thing.
Texas Superstar thing.
That's why people Google it and they can't find any information on it.
Texas Superstars are great plants, and they are, strong and stunning all over Texas, but they're not necessarily all cold hardy. So that's right. The point we wanted to make. Okay, I have a real general slide here if y'all want to say anything about any of those, but in general, deciduousness is a dormancy that's designed to get plants through a cold temperature. So if anything that you have is a deciduous tree, a deciduous shrub, it's likely that it's going to be okay. On the other hand, if anything's evergreen, it's likely that it may be a little bit, especially our broadleaf evergreens, may be a little bit more cold sensitive. So when you think about a red oak, which would be dormant, versus a live oak, which is evergreen. A live oak is, grows along the coast of the Gulf Coast, just a little bit more of a southern plant. Red oaks can grow all the way up into, the Canada, and so they're a more cold hardy plant. So if you think about it that way, in general, there are some exceptions, but in general, this is always true if a plant's well established. If it's got a big root system, that's going to help it get through any kind of stress, and including cold stress. So it won't always make it through. It could be that it's just a plant that cannot live in cold weather, but any established plant has a better shot at it than a plant that is recently planted. And if it's in a container, we often say that that's worth like 2 zones of cold hardiness, right? Do y'all say that, or is that just something that other people say? I don't know. Brent and Mung agree with that. But if anything's in a container, its roots are certainly more exposed to cold, and it's much more likely to die. So, we are normally here in Dallas-Fort Worth, we're normally zone 8. So our weather was like really zone 6 weather. And if you think about, a container, that might have been like in zone 4. So your container might have been in Minnesota while you were here in Texas. And, you think about how cold that is, it could be really tough. Another thing, moist soil versus dry soil. That's why Christy and Becky were talking so much about how it was great that a lot of places had some snow cover, had some precipitation. We didn't go into this in a bone dry cold and stay bone dry cold. So that's helpful for everybody. And then acclimation just means that it's had some time to get used to that temperature. Unfortunately, in Texas, generally in the winter, we end up with like lots of hot, cold, up, down, crazy weather. So I don't know if y'all have anything else to say about any of these, or if you would add some stuff on here. Nope. Okay. That's the general things that you can generally think about. So lots of our plants that we really enjoy using are often of Mediterranean origins, lots of herbs, rosemary, some Mediterranean fan palm. And we love them a lot because they're very good at getting through a hot, dry summer. But on the other hand, they don't have the extreme temperatures that we experienced over the last couple of weeks. So that's my giant rosemary, and you can see it's really big. It's been there for a long time and it's well established, but it looks pretty sad right now.
So Laura, you didn't protect it at all?
I did not protect it at all. It's really big. I mean, that's my truck, and my truck is right there. It's like touching my truck. See the size of that? I did not protect it, and it looks pretty bad.
I wrapped my rosemary in the baby blanket, and that's all I have. And I don't have, and of course, our temperature may be slightly higher than what you have there. And mine does not look as brown as yours. Mine still look green. Yeah.
So if you need some rosemary, maybe Dr. Gu can hook you up, but I probably can't. So I don't know what to say about that. This Mediterranean fan palm is at the Fort Worth Botanic Garden where I was yesterday, and it looks pretty bad. And this is a good point. I think I have my next slide is just about palms, so I'll switch to that. Oops, no, it's not. Never mind. I'll go to the palm slide. So palms in general are special plants in the way that they grow. They have this kind of one really important growing point. And if that stays protected in some way, then the palm may be okay. They're also quite variable in how cold hardy they are based upon sort of their point of origin, just like all plants are. So on this list, these were all palms that people specifically asked us about. The needle palm is a very cold hardy palm. If you have a needle palm, it may be just fine. In this picture, also from the Botanic Garden, but I also saw them at the Tarrant Regional Water District landscape. That palm behind that really sad looking abelia is a sable minor, which is a native palm to Texas. And it's a palm that doesn't grow tall. It's a short palm, as is a needle palm. So it protects that growing point pretty well. That growing point's down low, close to the ground, and it's kind of protected. And sable minor looks great all over Fort Worth, which is kind of amazing. On the other hand, some of these palms are Mediterranean fan palm. We usually consider a fairly cold hardy palm. Mexican fan palm, kind of too. But when you get to like Pendo Queen and date palms, those are definitely not cold hardy palms. So those are, if you have those, you may have been able to protect them. You may have been able to protect that growing point. It depends on where you are, of course, in the state, but those are all palms that cannot really withstand cold weather.
Yeah, and Laura, if I could make a comment on the Mexican fan palm, there's a closely related species, the California fan palm, and it does have more hardiness. I have a couple of 30 plus foot specimens at Overton, and those I've seen them go through single digits before. The entire head of foliage will brown out, but that, like you say, that growing point is still alive down in there, and it'll grow out and produce a full head just in one growing season. But I don't know. I'm really holding my breath this time because I've never seen them go through below 0. So anyway, we'll see if they grow out. But they are more hardy than the Mexican fan palms.
Yes. Any other cold hardy palms that we should mention if people are loving palms? Oh, the sables, the other sables, not the sable minors. Tall sables are also pretty cold hardy. The sable texana.
Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of foliage burning on those, but it looks like there's still green up. You can actually even still see green up in the central part of those.
And then the windmill fan palm, the
Yes.
Dracocarps is another good cold hardy fan palm. If you love palms, I would look for those.
Yeah, so in College Station, we are seeing a lot of the Mexican fan palms pretty much fried. But this is one of those that, the advice is just wait. And if it's still alive, you might see a new shoot that's green coming out the center. If you see that, you are probably in good shape.
And it may be May or June before you see that.
Yes, you're going to have to be real patient on those.
Right.
And here's the thing with palm, it really doesn't take a whole lot for them to show that they recovered, because it's, yeah.
Yeah. Though sometimes if you're concerned about the palm, whether it's dead or alive, and it's short enough so that you can get to the kind of the center of it. If that terminal bud starts rotting, it smells really bad usually. So you might be able to smell that it's dead. Or, just a little hint there. Okay, I'm going to go back to bulbs. Mung Mung, I know you wanted to talk about bulbs. Bulbs, of course, are underground storage structures, so that's good because we all know that it's a little bit warmer in the ground. But flowers are more likely to be gone than the bulb. And when you talk about something like tulips, which we really use as an annual, we may or may not have, especially those early flowering tulips, are probably not going to have any flowers. Did you have some other stuff you wanted to say about it?
Me?
Yes, you. You said put a slide of bulbs in. We did get a question, which was a really interesting question. What about if I had calla lily and narcissus bulbs left in buckets outside? Will they survive? And I'm going to say probably not, because it's kind of like a plant in a container. They're so much more exposed in a bucket.
I think for bulbs, it really depends on, how far that growing point has gone. It really, just like this, again, depending on when or how much that your the growing point has coming out. I think in the next slide that that's maybe more. Do you have the other bulb slide? Showing the go into the gladiolas, the lilies, and the okay.
I have to go way down there, but all right, here they are. The glads, the iris, the Oriental lilies in College Station, I presume.
So yeah, so like in this in this slide, the gladiolas, the top was totally fried. The top was totally fried, and then you could still see some of the brown leaves, hang on there. But really, that snow that we had really had a good insulation. So anything above that snow was fried, but then pretty much. And the snow, gave us a pretty good water. So all the green, so on the gladiolas, the green, those are new, just from that, those are new growths just from that, snow water and some of the rainwater that we have had and the warm temperature we had. And then on the right side, the Oriental lilies. So the Oriental lilies, a similar story. Some of the Oriental lilies that came out, grown taller than the 6-8 inches of snow that we had. So those ones are gone, but the ones got protected by the snow, snuggling in the snow. These are recovering really nicely. And similar story with iris. So it really depends on where the growing point was when that below zero temperature happened. I think the snow really insulated the growing point really well. I mean, they can tolerate some of the 32 slightly below freezing temperatures, and that snow is really good insulation. Definitely protected these bulbs.
So I would think that if they were in a bucket and it froze, they would probably not be good.
That depends on how deep.
A bucket, in a bucket, not in the ground, in a bucket.
Yeah, but if it was up against the house and under, it's going to depend where that pot
that
is.
bucket was, yes.
Right.
A bucket in my yard, nope. I would not be planting those. A bucket in Paul's yard, I think maybe.
Well, and also if it thaws out really slowly, you might have a better shot at it than if it unthawed very quickly.
Also true.
I don't know, and Laura, do you have enough information about the freezing condition of the bucket? Is it like totally all ice, or there's still some water?
It says there was ice in the bucket, but I don't know.
In the bucket, okay. If there's still water, then that's about 32 degrees. That's not too bad.
Not too bad for some bulbs, yes. But yeah, and bulbs are often kept in cold storage, so they don't mind being cold, but I don't know about frozen. All right, I'm gonna zoom back here a little bit.
While you're doing that, could I make a comment about the lilies?
Absolutely.
I did want to say on some of those lilies, if I have a lily called Triumphator that tries to grow during the winter, and one year the shoots froze. And basically what happened was I left them because I know that with lilies, sometimes if the shoot is frozen like that or broken or whatever, it basically rotates and forms a new bulb underground without growing. So you'll see nothing happen during the following growing season, but next year they'll come up and they'll do great.
Reg,
So
that was a perfect illustration of the reason you should be patient, right? Because you never know. I mean, that's an extreme example of something coming back, but
that's the thing. Yeah, that's the thing about bulbs. Like Brent, you said there, like the bulbs, if that shoot from that one, got frozen off, it kind of conserve the energy to the other bulb lid or corm lid, just depend on the underground structure. So yeah.
Absolutely.
So patience. And you had to wait for a whole season, right?
I did, and it was worth it. They're awesome.
All right. So with shrubs, we also need patience, and I think one of the things that will happen, and this is my Indian hawthorn in my yard, and interestingly enough, I had the green part was in a flower arrangement in the house. Okay, so it was inside the house, and I stuck it in the brown just so you could see how brown the brown was after the freeze. But all of these are woody plants, and the stems probably, you can tell, like, does your stem still feel pliable? Is it, if you scratch it, is it still got green cambium? So the stems are still alive. Now these leaves are probably going to fall off, but if I cut all this stem back, then I wouldn't really have a shrub. So it behooves me to be patient and see what happens. But I don't know. So we'll talk, these were all things that we got specific questions about. So I thought we would kind of talk through them a little bit. And when I look at this list, there's a couple of things that I think, oh yeah, that's probably going to be okay. And one of those is rose, like Brent said. And this was a great year if you're a procrastinator and maybe hadn't pruned your roses yet. You can wait a little bit longer and, wait and see kind of where they come out, and then you can prune it and it'll be great. Another one is holly. Most of our hollies are reasonably, they are broadleaf evergreens, but are reasonably cold hardy for us, even though I've seen Yopon holly, which is a native plant around here, with some damage, with some cold damage. So, but they'll probably be fine. All the other ones, there's a little bit more variability. Some of those are really tropical, like Ixora and Esperanza, though Esperanza often freezes back to its roots and comes back out. Isn't it in your perennial category, Brent, in the Texas Superstars? Yeah, so it often does that. Hydrangeas, there's lots of different kinds of hydrangeas. So we have oak leaf hydrangeas, which are probably going to be okay. They're completely dormant. We have mophead and panicle hydrangeas, which are also, if they're dormant, they're probably okay. But, depending upon how they were growing at the time, whether they were acclimated to cold or not, they might have more injury. And then we have some things that are a little bit more, oleander also in that Ixora category. That's kind of a subtropical plant, though they are really a tough subtropical plant. And a lot of times when we have them up here and they really do freeze back, they'll come back out from their roots, kind of like sometimes crepe myrtles also do that around here. So do y'all have anything to say about any of these specific species? Especially East Texas Brent Pemberton about the camellias and gardenias, which I cannot grow here.
Yeah, I tell you, camellias look really rough and lots of brown leaves. So I don't know about those. You're just going to have to watch. I've heard people comment that they have gardenias that still look fine. But I think there's also a lot of variability in the varieties there. You know, that Dave Creech could probably tell you more about that. But I will make a comment about rose, is that, you know, again, be patient. I'm kind of taking the tack of, you know, pruning them relatively high so that if some of those upper shoots don't make it, you've still got more to prune back on later in the spring, assuming that they're growing out from the base. So give them some room to grow.
Excellent strategy. One shrub that is not on this list that I have noticed with a lot of damage around here, and I've also seen, you mentioned Dr. Creech reminded me of this, is Loropetalum. Loropetalum looks really bad all over the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and also Dr. Creech, who's in Nacogdoches, posted pictures from the garden there of Loropetalum looking pretty bad. Paul, do you have Loropetalum? Have you been looking at it? How does it look in Houston?
Yeah, they're not happy. You know, they look rough, but you know, in years past, you know, we've never had this extreme of a cold, but usually they flush out and again, it's the old wait and see. If you do prune it high. But those and like you said, the oleanders look rough also, but I got a feeling, you know, they'll bounce back once we warm up and conditions get more favorable.
I also observed some bottle brush trees or shrubs that, you know, that's kind of in the Ixora category, you know, Ixora oleander category, definitely, you know, a lot of damage. But even with damage as bad as those plants, I was still, you know, I'm with you. Let's wait. Let's wait.
Okay. All right, live oak. We've got a lot to talk about with live oak. It's such an important landscape plant for us. I took this picture on Wednesday because to me, I thought, oh, people are gonna start calling me and asking me if their oak has oak wilt. You know, that was my first thought because of that pattern there. And Dr. Ong described it really well. He said that the plant got cold, and then it started transpiring a little bit, and then it got cold again, and then that's why that pattern is there. So it's really an interesting looking cold damage. I do think that it's going to be hard to know what's wrong with your oak this year. Even in a normal year, people often call us at the extension office and say, my live oak is dropping its leaves in the spring, because, you know, that's what happens, but they don't necessarily notice it or expect it, and it happens every year. Now, someone also asked if they have a broken branch on their oak, should they go ahead and prune that off? And yes, if you have a broken branch because you had ice, and any branch that's broken, you're gonna have to go ahead and prune that. It will not heal, and there's no reason to leave it there. So go ahead and prune it, even though we say don't prune oaks between February and June to avoid the transmission of oak wilt. You've still got to go ahead and prune that. The bark popping off is a story that I've been hearing from people just about every day around here. Apparently in the 1989 freeze, all over the Dallas-Fort Worth area, bark just popped off of live oaks. And they wanted to know if that was going to happen again. And I don't know, Dr. Ong, did you have something to say about that bark popping off thing?
No, you know, a lot of this is physiological. I think what folks need to remember is in the next few months, more than likely oak leaves, depending on the genetics, they'll drop off, and if they're alive, new leaves will come out. In terms of bark popping, you know, it's the same deal where you get vascular system, and it just so happened that they're transpiring and there's water in the xylem, and then it freezes. That's going to damage the xylem, and then eventually the cambial layer will start dying off, and when that happens, that adhesion loses, and then through the heat and cold expansion, you get the bark popping off. That's not a better way to say that. It's a physiological response. The thing to be careful is when you get all this damage, it's going to be an open field for opportunistic organisms to come in. So what we tend to see is you might see hypoxylin showing up a lot. It's not a very aggressive pathogen, but if you give it the right environment, you give it the right target, it will take it. You probably, if the tree is damaged to some extent, you may see an increase in wood boring type insects causing damage. So, you know, wood borers can do a huge damage on that. So do monitor it. If you start seeing holes, it may be something to consider whether to put an insecticide down or something to help protect it. But this is one of those, again, just wait and see what happens through the next few months, whether the leaves on live oaks are going to drop off, whether they're going to put out new leaves, and then hopefully, they were not actively picking up water during this incident. And if they don't do that, then you're probably not going to see the bark popping off.
And Kevin, wouldn't you think if it does pop, it's either going to be on the southern or the southwestern side of the tree?
No,
Because
believe it or
it
not,
would heat
I think
up?
it's it's hard to tell. Some people will say it's the south, and most of the time that's what's going to happen is the southern side tends to pop off, and part of it is always associated with an opportunistic fungus growing on the underside that basically disrupt that connection between the bark and the trunk. But I suspect that most of the damage is usually done on the north side, the cold side. And that's where you'll see, actually, instead of it really popping off, you actually see more of a sunken lesion, a canker-like thing, which then if you go and beat on it, then it'll pop off.
I also want to say that there's a lot of genetic variation, not just in live oaks, but many plants, but especially anything that's seed propagated, like a lot of our trees. When you think about live oaks, there are live oaks that grow in the almost into West Texas, right? And if you have a seed source from there, it might be a very different kind of genetic adaptation than a seed source from South Florida, where lots of live oaks grow and are propagated. So your individual live oak trees may react differently, even if they're right next to each other, just because of they came from different sources. So, more live oaks. Mung, you want to talk about these live oaks?
Yeah, well, I just want to show that there are just following up what you said there, that there are a lot of genetic variations from many of these seed propagated oaks. There are cut and propagated live oaks. Most of the things that we see here, are seed propagated, and as you can see in this landscape, the tree, well, first of all, their growth habit are slightly different. The one on the left side is kind of more open versus the one on the right is more upright. And then when it comes to the snow damage, not snow damage, but freezing damage. So the one on the left, you can see the color is grayish, compared to the one on the right. The right is greener. And the leaf damage definitely, there's this significant variation from what I see in the landscape, that from some trees completely the leaves just fall off, just 80% defoliation versus some just 10% defoliation. And as you can see, the foliage discoloration is gonna kind of gradually change in the just from the last week's snow to this week, and it's still gonna change. So just another message, just wait. Another message, just wait.
Great. Okay, here we have some more of those plants. Oh, I see that oleander and the bottlebrush and the Andean hawthorn. Anything? We also see some evergreen plants, like there's a juniper there that looks fine, because that's well adapted to cold weather.
And then the broadleaf evergreen holly, behind the Indian hawthorn also just looked just not touched at all. So, definitely you could see what's surviving and what's suffering.
I'd also like to say, just something I always like to say, landscape diversity is great, because then, like at this house, they didn't lose all their plants. They've got some things that are fine and others that may be damaged, but they don't have to replace their whole landscape. So just keep that in mind as you're planning going forward. It's a great thing.
I think, Laura, you have a great point there. And as often, we plant the things when they're small and gradually they grow. They may run out of space. This is kind of like a natural selection, and just a big extreme event kind of weed out the ones, and then they give the homeowner some space, give you some space to put in something that that you may have wanted space for, whatever that is.
Sure. All right, here's a tropical crop.
Here's the dwarf banana that you can see that obviously the top, but I would say that just if you could tolerate some ugliness, just leave the top there, just in case we have another freezing event, that the brown in top there may protect the underground if they still survive in a little bit.
Yeah, and I had a conversation with the landscaper yesterday, and he was like, well, should I cut these back? And I was like, oh, well, no, it's much better if you can wait, if it's okay. And he said, oh, yeah, it's kind of like a sweater, so yeah, it's like providing insulation around that growing point. So.
And also, I want to point out to the, on the right side, next to the dwarf banana. So those are the broadleaf ligustrums. Ligustrum recurvifolium. And I have seen some of these are pretty hardy, but these evergreen ligustrums, mostly in our landscapes in College Station area, I have seen they are doing just as bad as the Indian hawthorns that you've seen everywhere. And in particular in this landscape, and this, if you look close to the base of the ligustrums, like there are about an inch also, of the original root ball was planted above ground. And I think that may have severely just affected its freezing, affected its freezing tolerance. It's basically exposing the root system directly to the cold air. And this plant, as you can see, they're planted very close to the wall. I would think that they may have a little benefit of the microclimate, getting some of the heat radiant from the wall, but all this whole row of ligustrum, they were toast.
Okay, well, we don't want people to plant too deep, but planting too high, and also these are fairly recently planted, right? I mean, they look small and they're not well established. Okay, some more palms. Oh gosh. And this is a cycad.
Right, that's a cycad, yes.
Cycad, but it is an important one that we should talk about. So if you want to talk about these, Mung, go for it.
Well, the cycad, the colors has been changing from light green to this blonde color. Around College Station area, I haven't seen, I could have missed some, but pretty much all the cycads, the sago palms are turning to this blonde color. I know that some families actually protected them, but they're all this color. They're all this blonde color. But then again, even this color, I wouldn't do anything. I would recommend, just going against your instinct, just this knee jerk reaction, just cut them off. Let's enjoy this blonde.
The blonde cycad.
Yes, the blonde cycad. Yeah.
I will say that I lost my North Texas cycads in 2011 and didn't replace them with more cycads. So I don't have any now to look at. Paul, how did they look in Houston?
About the same. That blonde look, I like that description, but yeah, that's what we're seeing.
Okay.
They look like that here. I have one on the south side of my house, and you know, with all the snow and everything, I think the growing points may still be okay. But again, it may be June before you see them. But I've seen people even cut all of these fronds off and just have these sticks out there, and then in June this huge new growth will come out. So
Yeah.
so don't give up on them yet.
They do store a whole lot of it. If you've ever tried to dig one up, they store a lot underground too. So they're very good at storing their carbohydrates. Okay, looked at those. All right, Mung, what you got here? Daylily?
So that's the totally blonde one. That's a Chinese narcissus, and then these damaged. These are the leucojomes, the snowflakes. So again, so you know, it's the you know, the bulbs, like we mentioned before, you know, the above ground, the foliage, it's just mushy. I mean, they're completely mushy, you know, changed from that color. But then, you know, just those buried in the snow, they're totally okay. So I'm still gonna be expecting some really nice, the snowflake, the leucojomes flowers coming back soon. And snow is totally our friend. I mean, snow is totally our friend. I mean, you know, more and more, I appreciate the snow that we have.
Well, and that is the end of the slides that we put together for you, but we do appreciate all these great questions that we got. I think we tried to hit most of them. Oh, this is a question I really love. How do you choose plants that will survive in cold and also thrive in heat? How do you do that, Dr. Pemberton?
Hey, if we could figure that out, we'd be doing something different.
That's kind of in a way part of your life work, right? I mean,
There you
you're
go.
always evaluating plants to see how they do in Texas. So, and we definitely have our extreme weather here. So that's what we've got. All right, Dr. Bowling, are you back with us here to wrap things up?
I am. So I did just want to say, you know, we had several people that indicated that they weren't able to communicate with us through the chat. We did choose to disable the chat today because we had so many participants on. It was going to be really hard for us to moderate all of that, and to make sure we could preserve the integrity of this experience, we needed to have some control around that. However, we did try to answer as many of the questions as we possibly could that we got through the Qualtrics survey. I can tell you that Irfan spent hours literally going through those questions and trying to sort through those for us to address those. Certainly, if you have additional very pressing questions, you're welcome to reach out to us, reach out to your Agrolife extension representative of choice. You know, we won't take it personally if you have favorites, that's okay. But that's, you can reach out to whoever, try to get those questions answered. Irfan has included in the chat too a survey. If you don't mind filling that out, it takes less than 2 minutes. Irfan, it looks like the link is not active though. I'm not able to click on it, at least on my end.
Let me try kind of the original links and see if that will make it active. But you continue while I do that.
Okay, well, so we do have a weekly webinar series, Chat with Green Aggies. It's catered to our green industry professionals, but anybody is welcome to watch the live streaming of those webinars. They're Thursdays at 12 p.m. They're streamed through several different Agrolife Facebook pages, including the Texas Plant Disease Diagnostic Lab Facebook page, the Aggie Turf page. We will often also stream and share through the Aggie Horticulture page as well. So a lot of different places on Facebook to find additional great information. Our goal over the next several weeks is to continue to circle back to this topic and provide updates as we continue to learn more about the extent of damage and injury and continue to have additional recommendations for how to help your plant material recover. Looks like we were able to get those active links in there. So if you don't mind, it's very, very short survey. survey. Really helps us out to try to get some feedback from you guys on how this experience was for you, and how we can continue to offer nice experiences and resources for you in the future. That's, I think, about all I have left.
Becky, I'd like to interject.
To say.
I think insects were greatly underrepresented, and I did get one question in the email during the webinar. So I'm gonna answer it about insect pests and how they would have been impacted by the cold. Someone asked about chili thrips in particular, but then just other pests in general. So in general, insects have a lot of different management strategies when it comes to cold or freeze tolerance. So some of them have the ability to find warm habitats, whether it be under the snow or under the soil. Finding nice human habitats that are warmer, such as greenhouses. So a lot of our thrips can actually maintain their populations in some of those warmer human type habitats. And so they can actually then survive when it warms up. And that's why we have a lot of these pests in regions where there's, much cooler, much cooler temperatures or climates for more prolonged periods. There are some insects that can also actually tolerate being frozen completely and survive and thaw out and still be alive. And there's other ones too that can create basically antifreezes in their body, so it greatly decreases the temperature at which they freeze, and they basically go into a hibernation mode. There are some species that are perhaps a little bit more like a tropical species and maybe aren't well adapted to cool. If they are also not well adapted to finding warm climates during those prolonged periods of cool, they may have been knocked down, but it's really hard to predict. Not only its individual populations, but we also have to think about things like predators of the predators, right? So if their predators got knocked down even worse, then we might see a bigger pest problem. So it's really hard to predict a lot of those pest predator dynamics in the field, especially when those interactions are so diverse. So it's possible. Maybe we'll see some lower pest populations. Maybe we won't, but that'll be really interesting to learn about as we go into the growing season.
All right, awesome. So I'm glad we were able to slip a little insect knowledge in there for you guys.
As am I.
Hopefully we'll get more bug interest in the future when we do future backyard editions. All right, well, we really appreciate your time this afternoon, evening. We hope you have a wonderful weekend, and we look forward to the next time that we get to engage with you guys on a backyard edition of Chat with Green Aggies. Everybody have a good one.
Take care. Have a nice weekend.
For everyone, just in case you don't know where to find your Agrolife extension experts, simply Google your county name and Agrolife. I think you'll get to your county office, so that, in every county office, we have at least an ag agent who will most likely answer your question, or if not, he or she will know who to contact to get your question answered. So really start with your county extension office. That's the best local Agrolife, horticulture related information that you will get. Am I right, Laura? Am I right, Paul?
Yes, ma'am.
Y'all have a nice weekend. Take care.
Thank you.